The first thing you needed to understand about Red Hollow was that it died a little more every day. Not dramatically. Not with fire or flood or the kind of catastrophe that makes headlines in the territorial papers. Just slowly, like a man bleeding out in the desert, too stubborn to lie down but too weak to walk anywhere that mattered. The buildings sagged. The people sagged. Even the damn horses looked defeated, standing hip-shot at the hitching posts with their heads low and their eyes dull. Evelyn Cross had watched it happen for 7 years. She stood behind the bar of the Lucky Strike Saloon, though there was nothing lucky about it, and nobody had struck anything valuable in Red Hollow since the played-out silver mine collapsed in '71, and wiped down glasses that would just get dirty again. Her hands moved automatically. Wipe, inspect, set aside. Wipe, inspect, set aside. The rhythm was meditative, meaningless, safe. Another round, Evelyn. She didn't look up. Didn't need to. She knew Jake Morrow's voice the way you know the creak of your own floorboards. Weathered, worn, resigned. You got money for another round, Jake? Silence. Then a dry laugh that turned into a cough. You know I don't. Then you don't get another round. Come on now. Calder's boys cleaned me out last week. You know that. Whole town knows that. Cut an old man some slack. Now she looked up. Jake was 60 if he was a day, his face a roadmap of bad decisions and worse luck. He'd been the town's blacksmith once, before Calder, before the protection money, before the casual brutality that had become Red Hollow's daily weather. I cut you slack. I cut everyone slack, Evelyn said. Her voice was flat, factual. Then I can't pay my own dues, then Calder's boys come for me. You want that on your conscience, Jake? He looked away. No, ma'am. Then we understand each other. She went back to wiping glasses. Jake stayed at the bar, nursing the dregs of whatever he'd already paid for, and the Lucky Strike settled back into its usual afternoon stupor. 4 men playing cards in the corner, their faces blank. 2 ranch hands drinking in silence by the window. The piano in the corner gathering dust because the piano player had left town 6 months ago and nobody had the energy to learn. This was Red Hollow now. This was what it had become. Evelyn had arrived 7 years ago on the afternoon stage, carrying 1 bag and asking no questions. She'd bought the Lucky Strike from a widow who couldn't afford to keep it, paid in cash, and started pouring drinks the same day. She didn't smile much, didn't talk much. Kept the place clean, the liquor watered but not so watered you'd complain, and minded her own business. Perfect for Red Hollow, really. A town full of people trying to become invisible. The door swung open. Hot air and dust rolled in, and with it came trouble. Not Calder himself, he rarely showed up before evening, but 3 of his men. Evelyn recognized them immediately. Everyone did. You learned the faces of the people who could hurt you. The tall one was Vernon Pike. Scar across his left cheek, teeth like a kicked-in fence. The stocky one with the dead eyes was Raphael Cord. And the youngest, barely 20 but already mean as a snake, was Danny Hewitt, Calder's nephew. Which made him untouchable, and he knew it. They didn't walk in, they swaggered. The card players in the corner immediately found their hands fascinating. The ranch hands stared into their drinks like they'd discovered religion at the bottom of a whiskey glass. Vernon Pike grinned. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Afternoon, Miss Evelyn? She set down her glass, folded her towel, met his eyes without flinching. Vernon? Mighty quiet in here today. It's Tuesday afternoon. Always quiet on Tuesday afternoon. That's so. He looked around like he was seeing the place for the first time. Seems to me like business ain't what it used to be. Might be you're falling behind on your payments. I'm current. Are you now? Danny Hewitt stepped up to the bar, leaning on it with both elbows. Up close, she could smell the whiskey on his breath. Drinking before sundown. Bad sign. Because Uncle Briggs, he was looking at the books last night, said it seems like maybe the Lucky Strike owes a little extra this month. I paid what I owed, same as always. Maybe what you owed changed. Raphael Cord hadn't moved from the doorway, but his hand rested casual-like on the butt of his revolver, making sure everyone saw, making sure everyone understood. Inflation, you know, costs go up. Evelyn's expression didn't change. Couldn't change. She'd practiced this for 7 years, the art of showing nothing, feeling nothing, being nothing, worth noticing. I'll need to talk to Briggs directly about any changes in the arrangement. Vernon Pike's grin widened. Oh, you'll get your chance. He'll be by tonight. But in the meantime, he reached across the bar and grabbed a bottle of the good whiskey, the stuff she kept on the top shelf for paying customers. Consider this an advance payment. She didn't move, didn't reach for the bottle, didn't protest. The silence stretched. Danny Hewitt laughed, a high, unpleasant sound. Look at her, doesn't even care. That's what I like about you, Evelyn. You know your place. Vernon uncorked the bottle and took a long pull, whiskey running down his chin. Most women, they'd cry or beg or make a fuss. Not you. You got sense. They took 2 more bottles on their way out. Nobody stopped them. Nobody said a word. When the door finally swung shut, Jake Morrow let out a breath he'd been holding. Jesus, Evelyn, you all right? I'm fine. They can't just... They can. They do. You know that. She picked up a fresh glass and started wiping it down. Wipe, inspect, set aside. The rhythm calming her pulse, steadying her hands, pushing down the thing that wanted to rise up in her chest. That old, dangerous thing. The part of her that remembered how to solve problems like Vernon Pike and Raphael Cord and Danny Hewitt. The part she'd buried 7 years ago. The part that, even now, was taking mental notes. Vernon favored his right side. Old injury, probably. Raphael kept his weight on his back foot, gun hand always ready. Danny was fast, cocky, and stupid. A dangerous combination in a young man with something to prove. She shook her head, forced the observations away. That wasn't who she was anymore. That wasn't who she could afford to be. Evelyn, Jake was staring at her. You sure you're all right? You got a look on your face I ain't never seen before. I'm fine, Jake. Finish your drink. The afternoon crawled by. The card players left. The ranch hands left. Jake eventually left. The saloon emptied until it was just Evelyn and the dust motes hanging in the slanted sunlight, and the knowledge that Briggs Calder would be walking through that door in a few hours, expecting her to smile and scrape and pay whatever new tribute he'd invented. She looked at her reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Gray hair pulled back tight, lines around her eyes and mouth. 53 years old, and she looked every day of it. Looked harmless. Looked beaten down. Looked like everyone else in Red Hollow. Perfect. She'd built this disguise carefully, layer by layer, year by year. The posture, the voice, the carefully cultivated invisibility. Because invisible women were safe women. Invisible women didn't attract attention. Invisible women could pour drinks and sweep floors and slowly, quietly forget who they used to be. Evelyn Cross wasn't even her real name. That woman, her real self, she'd left her behind in a burned-out ranch house outside Santa Fe, kneeling in the ashes of everything she'd built, everything she'd taught, everyone she'd loved. The students were dead. The dream was dead. And Evelyn Marlowe, the legendary combat instructor who'd trained 3 generations of lawmen and soldiers and anyone else willing to learn discipline over arrogance, precision over speed, life over death, that woman had died there too. Or so she'd thought. But 7 years in Red Hollow, watching good people crushed under Briggs Calder's boot, watching the town bleed out one shakedown at a time, watching men like Vernon Pike steal bottles of whiskey because they could, something was stirring. Something she'd tried very hard to drown. The door opened again as the sun touched the horizon. Briggs Calder walked in like he owned the place, which, in every way that mattered, he did. He was 45, barrel-chested, with a face like cured leather and eyes that calculated value the way other men calculated distance. 5 of his men flanked him, Vernon and Raphael and Danny, plus 2 others she didn't know by name. They spread out automatically, controlling the room, blocking the exits. Professional, practiced, predatory. Evelyn. Calder's voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle. That made it worse somehow. We need to talk about your financial situation. She faced him across the bar, hand steady, face neutral. I'm current on all my payments. See? That's where we disagree. He settled onto a bar stool like he had all the time in the world. Your payments were based on the old rate structure, but costs have gone up. Security ain't cheap, protection ain't free. And I'm thinking the Lucky Strike, prime location, good foot traffic, established customer base. I'm thinking it's worth more than what you've been paying. How much more? Double. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. She couldn't afford double. Nobody in Red Hollow could afford double. That was the point. I can't pay that. Sure you can. You just need to make some adjustments. Water the whiskey a little more, raise your prices, get creative. My customers are already broke because of your protection fees. I raise prices, I lose what business I have left. Calder smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Then I guess you better find yourself some new customers, or... He let the word dangle. Or you could consider other arrangements. The way he looked at her made her skin crawl, made the old instincts flare hot and bright, 3 feet away. Gun on his right hip, worn grip, leather thong loose. He'd clear leather in maybe a second and a half, slow, sloppy. She could... No, she couldn't. She wouldn't. That wasn't who she was anymore. I'll figure something out, she said. You got 1 week. After that... He stood up, gestured to his men. Vernon immediately grabbed another bottle off the shelf. Danny swept a handful of coins off the bar, her tip jar, the few cents left by customers who could barely afford a drink in the first place. Calder paused at the door. Oh, and Evelyn? Don't even think about running. I own this town. I own everyone in it, including you. They left. The silence that followed felt like the aftermath of a thunderstorm. Thick, heavy, charged with something dangerous. Evelyn stood behind her bar, hands flat on the wood, breathing slowly through her nose. 1 week. She had 1 week to come up with money she didn't have, to pay tribute to a man who'd bleed her dry anyway, in a town where nobody would help because they were all too busy drowning themselves. She could run. Pack her bag, catch the morning stage, disappear into another territory under another name, start over somewhere else. But running was what she'd been doing for 7 years, wasn't it? Running from the past. Running from the guilt. Running from the responsibility of being someone who could actually do something. And where had it gotten her? Here. Trapped in a dying town, watching it get murdered piece by piece, keeping her head down and her hands clean while people suffered. She thought about her students, the ones who'd died in Santa Fe. Young men and women who'd come to her believing that skill and discipline could make the world safer. That violence, properly understood and carefully applied, could protect the innocent. She'd taught them that, believed it. Then watched it all turn to ash when the Burke gang rolled through, when her best student, God Marcus, just 19 years old, tried to stand up to 12 armed raiders and got cut down in the street. The rest had followed. Honor and training, and all her carefully taught lessons about restraint, about choosing your battles, about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. None of it mattered when the bullets started flying and the innocent got caught in the crossfire. So she'd run, changed her name, became nobody. But nobody couldn't stop Briggs Calder. Nobody couldn't save Red Hollow. Nobody just poured drinks and watched good people get ground into the dust and told herself it wasn't her problem. The door opened again. Not Calder this time. Sarah Chen, who ran the general store with her husband Thomas. She looked exhausted, terrified. Evelyn, I need to talk to you. Sarah, what's wrong? It's Thomas. Calder's men came by today. Said we owed triple on our protection fees. Triple. We don't have... Her voice cracked. Thomas told them no. Told them we'd already paid. And they... What did they do? Beat him. Right there in the store, in front of customers. Danny Hewitt held me back while he just kept... Sarah was crying now, silent tears tracking through the dust on her face. Thomas is hurt bad, Evelyn. Doc says maybe broken ribs, definitely broken nose. And Calder says if we don't pay by Friday, they'll burn the store down. Evelyn came around the bar, put her arms around Sarah Chen and let the woman sob into her shoulder. Let her own mind race through calculations she'd thought she'd forgotten. Friday, 3 days. We can't pay, Sarah whispered. We're ruined. We're going to lose everything. No, Evelyn heard herself say. You're not. Sarah pulled back, confusion in her red-rimmed eyes. What? You're not going to lose everything. I'm going to talk to Calder. Talk to him. Evelyn, you can't. He won't listen. I can be very persuasive when I need to be. There was something in her voice, something cold and hard and utterly certain. Sarah Chen stared at her like she was seeing a completely different person, which, in a way, she was. You should go home, Evelyn said gently. Take care of Thomas. I'll handle this. But trust me. Sarah left, still confused, still scared, but with something new in her expression. Hope, maybe. Or just the desperate need to believe that someone, somewhere, might actually stand up to the monster bleeding their town dry. Evelyn locked the saloon door behind her, turned the sign to closed, walked upstairs to her private room, sparse, clean, anonymous, and opened the trunk at the foot of her bed. She'd told herself she'd never open this trunk again, swore it, but some promises weren't meant to be kept. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were the tools of her former life. Not weapons. She'd burned those in Santa Fe, but books, journals, diagrams. 7 years of collected wisdom about the human body in motion, about reaction time and muscle memory, and the 1,000 tiny variables that separated the fast from the dead. And beneath them, folded carefully, a worn leather jacket she hadn't worn in 7 years. Her teaching jacket. The one Marcus had been wearing when he died. She ran her fingers over the bullet holes. 3 of them. Small, precise, professional. The Burke gang had been professionals. That was the problem. Her students had been good. She'd made sure of that. But good wasn't enough against men who killed for a living and didn't care about honor or fairness or giving you a chance to surrender. She tried to teach another way. A better way. And gotten everyone she cared about killed. So maybe, she thought, lifting the jacket out of the trunk, maybe it was time to stop teaching. Time to stop believing in better. Time to just solve the problem the way problems like Briggs Calder got solved on the frontier. Quick, final, permanent. No. She folded the jacket back into the trunk, closed the lid, sat on the edge of her bed with her head in her hands. This was the trap, wasn't it? Violence as solution. Violence as justice. Violence as the easy answer to complicated problems. She'd spent 20 years teaching people to fight and then watched them die because fighting was all they knew, because she'd made them believe they could win. But what was the alternative? Let Calder burn Red Hollow to the ground? Let Sarah and Thomas lose everything? Let a town full of decent people just give up? She thought about that moment in the saloon. Calder 3 feet away. Gun loose, slow draw. She could have what? Shot him? In front of 5 of his men? Started a war she couldn't win? Maybe taken down Calder and Vernon and Raphael before Danny's bullet found her spine? And then what? She'd be dead? The town would be leaderless. Calder's organization would send someone worse. Someone who'd make an example of Red Hollow that would echo across 3 territories. No. If she was going to do this, if she was going to step back into the life she'd run from, she needed to be smart. Needed to think like the instructor she'd been, not the killer she'd never wanted to become. Needed a plan. She stood up, walked to the window, looked out over Red Hollow's main street as night settled in and the oil lamps flickered to life. Counted buildings, counted alleys, counted sight lines and escape routes, and all the architectural details she'd spent 7 years pretending not to notice. Red Hollow had maybe 300 people. Calder kept 15 to 20 men on his payroll, rotating through town in shifts. Too many to fight head-on. But organizations had weaknesses, hierarchies could be disrupted, power structures depended on fear, and fear, properly understood, carefully applied, could cut both ways. She wasn't going to kill Briggs Calder. She was going to make him wish he'd never heard of Red Hollow. The plan took shape slowly, carefully, like assembling a puzzle where one wrong piece meant death. She'd need to move in stages. Test Calder's people, find the cracks in their armor, make them doubt, make them scared, make them understand that the quiet woman behind the bar wasn't what she seemed. Step 1, information. She needed to know Calder's operation inside and out, schedule, personnel, vulnerabilities, and she knew exactly who could help with that. The next morning, Evelyn opened the Lucky Strike as usual, poured drinks as usual, smiled and nodded and played the role of the harmless saloon keeper. But she was listening now, really listening, not just to what people said, but to what they didn't say. The careful silences, the nervous glances, the way conversations stopped when certain names came up. Jake Morrow came in around noon, his hand shaking as he counted out coins for a drink. "Jake," she said quietly, "I need a favor." He looked up, suspicious, scared. "What kind of favor?" "Information about Calder's operation. Who reports to who, where they stay, when they make their rounds." His face went white. "You trying to get me killed?" "I'm trying to save this town, but I need to know what we're up against." "We?" He laughed, bitter and broken. There ain't no we, Evelyn. There's Calder and his men, and there's the rest of us waiting to die. That's all there is. She leaned across the bar, met his eyes. Let him see something he'd never seen before. The steel beneath the disguise, the coiled strength she'd kept hidden for 7 years. Jake, do you trust me? He swallowed hard. I don't know. Then trust this. In 3 days, Sarah and Thomas Chen are going to lose everything unless someone stops Calder. In a week, I'll lose the Lucky Strike. In a month, who knows who's next? This town is dying, Jake. We can keep dying slow, or we can fight back. Fight back? His voice cracked on the words. Against Calder? You're crazy. Maybe, but I'm also the only chance Red Hollow has. She poured him a drink. On the house, slid it across the bar. Think about it, she said. I'll be here when you're ready. He drank, thought, finished the whiskey and stood to leave, paused at the door. Vernon Pike, he said without turning around. He stays at the boarding house, room 3. Sleeps till noon most days, drunk by sundown. Raphael Cord bunks with the ranch hands at Calder's Spread, 5 miles north. Danny Hewitt, Jake's voice hardened. Danny Hewitt does whatever the hell he wants because he's Calder's nephew and everyone's too scared to stop him. Thank you, Jake. Don't thank me yet. You get yourself killed, I'm going to feel terrible about it. He left, but he'd given her a starting point. Over the next 2 days, Evelyn gathered information like a prospector panning for gold. A word here, an observation there, bits and pieces of intelligence that painted a picture of Calder's organization. She learned that Vernon Pike had a gambling problem and owed money to a dealer in Silver Springs, that Raphael Cord sent money to a woman in Mexico, sister, wife, every month without fail, that Danny Hewitt was courting the daughter of one of Calder's lieutenants and had gotten into a fistfight last week when someone suggested the girl could do better. Weaknesses, pressure points, leverage. She also learned, through careful questions and cautious conversations, that Calder himself would be leaving town on Friday. Business in Santa Fe, 2-day trip, leaving his men in charge. Perfect. Friday morning dawned clear and hot. Sarah Chen came by the saloon just after sunrise, her face drawn with stress. Today's the day, she said. Calder's men said they'd be by at noon for the money. How much does he want? $600. We don't have it. We don't have half of it. Evelyn nodded slowly. All right. Here's what's going to happen. When they come for the money, you tell them you need more time, that you're selling inventory, that you'll have it tomorrow. They won't. They will, because I'm going to make them an offer they can't refuse. What kind of offer? Evelyn smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. The kind that makes them reconsider their career choices. At 11:30, she walked across the street to the general store, stood behind the counter with Sarah and Thomas, who looked like hell, his face purple with bruises, and waited. Noon came. The door opened. Vernon Pike. Raphael Cord. 2 others she didn't know. No Danny. Interesting. Maybe he'd gone with Calder to Santa Fe. Well, well, Vernon drawled. Got my money, Sarah. She needs more time, Evelyn said. Vernon's eyes swiveled to her. The hell are you doing here? Offering you a deal. Don't need no deals, need $600. How about this instead? You walk out of here empty-handed and I don't break both your legs. The silence that followed was profound. Raphael Cord's hand drifted toward his gun. The other 2 men straightened up, suddenly alert. Vernon Pike just stared at her like she'd started speaking Chinese. Then he laughed. You threatening me, old woman? Giving you options, Vernon. You're a gambling man. You understand odds. Right now, the odds of you walking out of here with all your bones intact are dropping fast. You're crazy. But his voice had changed, less certain, like he'd seen something in her expression that didn't match the harmless saloon keeper he thought he knew. Let's find out. She moved. Not fast, not dramatically, just shifted her weight forward, closed the distance between them to nothing, and put her hand on Vernon's gun before he'd even processed that she'd moved at all. Too slow, she said quietly. Then she plucked the revolver from his holster like she was picking an apple. Raphael went for his gun. She threw Vernon's pistol, not at Raphael, but at the hanging oil lamp above his head. Glass exploded. Raphael flinched back. In that half-second of distraction, she crossed the store, caught his wrist as his gun cleared leather, and applied pressure to a nerve cluster she'd taught 100 students to find. His hand spasmed open. The gun fell. She caught it before it hit the floor. Now she had 2 guns. Raphael and Vernon had none. The other 2 men stood frozen, hands halfway to their weapons, trying to understand how an old woman had just disarmed 2 of Calder's most dangerous enforcers in less than 5 seconds. "Here's how this works," Evelyn said, her voice still calm, still level. "You go back to Calder. You tell him that Red Hollow doesn't owe him anything anymore. Not protection money, not dues, not tribute, nothing. This town is closed for business." "You're dead," Vernon spat. "You know that? Calder's going to think very carefully about whether he wants to come back here. Because I'm only going to demonstrate this once." She ejected the cylinders from both revolvers, let the bullets plink onto the floor, tossed the empty guns back to their owners. "Next time, I won't be polite about it." "You think you scared us?" Raphael's face was dark with humiliation. "You think this changes anything? I think you should leave now while you still can." They left, scrambling more than walking. The door banged shut behind them. Sarah Chen was staring at her with wide eyes. Thomas looked like he'd just witnessed a miracle. Or maybe an execution. Both, perhaps. "Evelyn," Sarah whispered, "what did you just do?" "Bought us some time." She started collecting the bullets from the floor. "They'll go straight to Calder. He'll be back by Sunday. And when he comes—" She looked up, met Sarah's eyes. "When he comes, I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse either." What if he refuses anyway? Evelyn thought about Santa Fe, about her students, about 7 years of running and hiding and pretending to be someone she wasn't. "Then Red Hollow is going to learn exactly who Evelyn Cross used to be," she said, and why she stopped. Word spread through Red Hollow like fire through dry grass. By sunset, everyone knew what had happened at the Chen's general store. The versions differed in details. Some said Evelyn had moved like lightning. Others swore she'd used some kind of Eastern fighting technique. A few insisted she must have had help. But they all agreed on one thing. The quiet woman who poured drinks had just humiliated 2 of Calder's best men without breaking a sweat. Evelyn spent the afternoon in the Lucky Strike, serving customers who suddenly couldn't stop staring at her. She ignored the attention, kept her hands busy, kept her face neutral. But inside, her mind was running calculations she hadn't made in 7 years. Calder would be back Sunday. That gave her roughly 48 hours to prepare for a confrontation she couldn't avoid and probably couldn't win. Not if he came back with his full crew. Not if he decided to make an example that would echo across 3 territories. She'd started something today, crossed a line she'd sworn never to cross again. And now there was no going back. Jake Morrow slid onto a bar stool around 5, his hands steadier than she'd seen them in months. He didn't order a drink, just sat there, studying her face like he was seeing it for the first time. "You want to tell me what the hell that was about?" he finally said. "Which part?" "The part where you disarmed Vernon Pike like he was a child playing with his daddy's gun. The part where you moved faster than I've ever seen anyone move. The part where—" He stopped, shook his head. "Who are you, Evelyn?" She set down the glass she'd been wiping. "Someone who got tired of watching." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." He was quiet for a moment, then, "People are talking, saying you must have been a soldier, or maybe a marshal. Someone said their cousin knew a woman down in Santa Fe who trained lawmen, but that was years ago, and Jake," her voice was soft but carried an edge, "stop digging." "Why? Because you're ashamed? Because you've been hiding? Because the woman I used to be got a lot of good people killed." The words came out harder than she intended. "And I'd prefer not to repeat that mistake here." That shut him up. He sat there processing, while she went back to wiping glasses that didn't need wiping. The saloon was filling up with the evening crowd, but nobody was drinking much. They were watching, waiting, the whole town holding its breath to see what happened next. Sarah Chen came in around 6, walked straight to the bar and put both hands flat on the wood. "Thomas wants to know if you're planning to get us all killed." "No." "That's it? Just no?" "I'm planning to stop Calder. Different thing entirely." Sarah's laugh was brittle. "Stop him! Right. 1 woman against 20 armed men. That's not a plan, Evelyn. That's suicide." "Then you should probably stay out of the way when it happens." "We can't—" Sarah lowered her voice, glanced around at the watching faces. We can't just sit back and let you fight our battles. That's not right. You have a better idea? We could run. All of us. Pack up and leave, find another town, start over somewhere Calder doesn't own. Evelyn had thought about that. Spent 7 years thinking about it, actually. Running was easy. Running was safe. Running meant you didn't have to face the consequences of who you were or what you'd done. And when the next Briggs Calder shows up, she asked, when the next town starts dying because nobody wants to fight back, what then, Sarah? How many times you willing to run? Sarah didn't have an answer for that. The night wore on. Drinks were poured. Conversations happened in hushed tones. Evelyn kept working, kept moving, kept her face carefully blank while her mind ran through scenarios and contingencies and all the ways this could go wrong. Around 9, the door opened and a man she didn't recognize walked in. Young, maybe 25, with the kind of careful eyes that came from seeing too much too soon. He wore a deputy's badge pinned to a worn vest, and his hand rested easy on the butt of a well-maintained Colt. He scanned the room, found Evelyn behind the bar, and walked over. You Evelyn Cross? Depends on who's asking. Name's William Hart, deputy out of Silver Springs. I heard some interesting stories this afternoon. Stories about a woman who disarmed 2 of Briggs Calder's men without firing a shot. The saloon went dead quiet. Everyone listening now. Everyone wondering if this was help or just another problem. Stories get exaggerated, Evelyn said carefully. Do they? Hart smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because the stories I heard were pretty specific. Said you moved like someone with training, real training, the kind that doesn't come from practice, comes from teaching. Her pulse kicked up a notch. She kept her face neutral. You didn't ride all the way from Silver Springs to discuss gossip. No, ma'am. I rode here because Briggs Calder has been bleeding this territory dry for 3 years, and nobody's been able to touch him. Not the law, not the ranchers, not the miners. He's too connected, too protected, too damn careful. Hart leaned on the bar. But if someone finally stood up to him, if someone finally made him bleed, well, that changes things. Changes them how? There's a federal marshal coming through next month. Name's Clayton Ross. He's been building a case against Calder for 2 years. Extortion, murder, cattle theft, you name it. But he needs witnesses, people willing to testify. And right now, everyone's too scared. Hart's eyes were steady on hers. But if someone showed them it was possible to fight back, if someone proved that Calder could bleed, then maybe people would find their courage, Evelyn finished. That's a nice theory, deputy, but theories don't stop bullets. No, ma'am. Training does. Skill does. And you've got both, don't you? She didn't answer. Didn't need to. The silence said enough. Hart straightened up. I can't help you officially. The jurisdiction's murky and my sheriff would have my badge. But unofficially, there's a rifle scope in my saddlebag that might come in handy. And I know where Calder keeps his spare horses. Information like that could be useful to someone planning a stand. Why tell me this? Because I've been a lawman for 6 years, and I'm tired of watching men like Calder win. He tipped his hat. Calder's coming back Sunday. You probably already knew that. What you might not know is he's bringing extra men. 10, maybe 12. He's angry, and he wants to make a statement. Evelyn's stomach tightened. 10 or 12 on top of his regular crew. That wasn't a collection operation. That was an execution squad. Thought you should know, Hart said quietly. He turned to leave, then paused. There's a woman buried in Santa Fe, Evelyn Marlowe. Died 7 years ago in a fire that took her school and everyone in it. Terrible tragedy. Her breath caught. If that woman were still alive, Hart continued, not looking at her, I imagine she'd want to know that one of her students survived. Kid named Daniel Wu. Moved to California, became a marshal himself. He talks about her sometimes. Says she taught him that violence should always be the last option, that the best fighters are the ones who never have to prove it. He met her eyes. But when you do have to prove it, when there's no other choice, you make it count. He left before she could respond. The saloon erupted in whispers the moment the door closed. Jake Morrow was staring at her with something like awe. Sarah Chen looked terrified. Everyone else was somewhere in between, hopeful and scared and desperately wanting to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Evelyn felt the weight of their expectations like a physical thing, felt the past 7 years of carefully constructed anonymity crumbling around her, felt the ghost of Evelyn Marlowe rising up, demanding to be heard. Daniel Wu had survived. One of her students had made it out, had become a marshal, had remembered what she taught him. The knowledge hit her harder than she'd expected. For 7 years, she'd carried the guilt of those deaths like a stone around her neck, had convinced herself that her teaching had been worthless, that her methods had failed, that violence, no matter how carefully controlled, only led to more violence. But Daniel had survived, had taken what she'd taught and made something good with it. Maybe, she thought, maybe she'd been wrong about everything. She closed the lucky strike early that night, sent everyone home, locked the doors, and climbed the stairs to her room. The trunk at the foot of her bed seemed to glow in the lamplight, promising and threatening in equal measure. She opened it, pulled out the leather jacket, held it up to the light, and counted the bullet holes again. 3 of them. Marcus had been wearing this when he died. Sweet, idealistic Marcus, who'd believed with his whole heart that discipline and training could change the world. He'd been wrong, but he hadn't been entirely wrong. Beneath the jacket were her journals, 20 years of notes and observations and diagrams, combat theory, reaction time analysis, psychological profiles of different fighting styles, everything she'd learned about violence and how to control it, how to minimize it, how to make it serve life instead of death. She'd thought this knowledge was poison, but looking at it now with Calder coming back Sunday with an execution squad, she wondered if maybe it was medicine. Bitter and dangerous, sure, but sometimes bitter medicine was the only thing that could save a patient. She spent the night reading, reviewing, remembering skills she'd tried so hard to forget. By dawn, she had a plan. Not a good plan, not a safe plan, but a plan that might keep Red Hollow from burning and its people from dying. Step 1 was already done. She'd provoked Calder, made him angry, ensured he'd come back with overwhelming force. That was intentional, because overwhelming force was predictable. Angry men made mistakes, and Calder was going to be very, very angry. Step 2 was preparation. She needed the town ready. Not to fight, she couldn't ask that of them, wouldn't risk more deaths on her conscience, but to be smart, to be hidden, to give her the space she needed to work. Step 3 was the hard part, the part that made her hands shake when she thought about it too long. Step 3 was facing Briggs Calder in the street and proving once and for all that fear could cut both ways. Saturday morning, she called a meeting, posted notices around town. By noon, nearly 100 people had crowded into the Lucky Strike, more than the Saloon had seen in years. They filled every corner, spilled out onto the porch, pressed close to hear what the quiet woman who'd disarmed Vernon Pike had to say. Evelyn stood behind her bar and looked out at faces she'd served for 7 years. Good people, scared people, people who'd had the life beaten out of them one shakedown at a time. Calder's coming back tomorrow, she said. No preamble, no build-up, just the truth laid bare. He's bringing extra men. He's angry, and he's coming to make an example of anyone who stood against him. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Fear, resignation, the familiar acceptance of people who'd given up hoping for better. I'm going to stop him, Evelyn continued, but I need your help. Not to fight. I don't want any of you risking your lives. But I need you to be smart. I need you to trust me. Trust you to do what? Someone called from the back. Get yourself killed? Maybe, but if I do, at least I'll die standing up, which is more than Calder's given any of you the chance to do. That hit home. She saw it in their faces, the shame of 7 years spent crawling, the anger at themselves for letting it happen, the desperate, fragile hope that maybe this woman, whoever she really was, could actually do what she promised. Thomas Chen stepped forward, his bruised face set in hard lines. What do you need from us? Tomorrow I need the streets empty. Women and children inside, doors locked. Men too, unless they've got military training and the stomach for what might happen. I need clear sightlines down Main Street. I need everyone out of the crossfire. She paused. And I need you to understand that what I'm about to do, what I used to be, it's not something to admire. It's not heroic, it's just necessary. Sarah Chen was crying quietly. Jake Morrow looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Others were nodding, grim-faced and determined. One more thing, Evelyn said. No matter what happens tomorrow, no matter what you see, don't interfere. Don't try to help. Don't pick up a gun unless Calder's men start shooting at civilians. If it comes to that, if I fail and they turn on the town, then you run. You take your families and you run as far and fast as you can. Understand? Silence. Then slowly, one by one, they nodded. The meeting broke up. People filed out, whispering among themselves, making plans to secure their homes and hide their valuables, and pray that the crazy woman from the Lucky Strike knew what she was doing. Deputy Hart found her an hour later, sitting alone in the empty saloon. "That was quite a speech," he said. "It was the truth. Truth's a dangerous thing in a town like this." He set something on the bar, a leather case, worn and well-traveled. "The rifle scope I mentioned. It's good to about 300 yards if the light's right. Not that I'm suggesting you use it." "Of course not. There's also a map in there, shows Calder's ranch, his regular patrol routes, where he keeps his ammunition stores. You know, in case you ever wanted to go for a ride and happened to get lost." Evelyn opened the case. Inside was indeed a scope, high quality, military grade. And beneath it, detailed maps marked with notations in careful handwriting. Weak points, guard schedules, vulnerabilities. "You've been planning this for a while," she said. "Like I said, I'm tired of watching men like Calder win." Hart met her eyes. "But I'm also tired of watching good people die trying to stop them. So whatever you're planning tomorrow, make sure it's something you can walk away from. The territory needs people like you alive, not martyred. People like me are the reason towns die in the first place." "No, ma'am. People like Calder are the reason towns die. People like you are the reason they sometimes don't." He left her with the maps and the scope and the weight of his expectations. She spent the rest of Saturday preparing. Not weapons. She wouldn't need more than what Calder's men would bring. But the space, the battlefield, the 1,000 tiny details that could mean the difference between control and chaos. She walked Main Street a dozen times, memorizing sight lines and cover positions. Noted where the sun would be at noon, where shadows would fall. Which windows offered clean shots and which were just death traps for anyone stupid enough to use them. She talked to the blacksmith about reinforcing certain doors. Talked to the general store about clearing merchandise away from the windows. Talked to anyone who'd listen about making sure the innocent had somewhere safe to hide. And in the quiet moments, when the work was done and the town had settled into nervous anticipation, she sat in her room with Marcus's jacket and let herself remember. Remember teaching him to draw. Not fast. Anyone could be fast. But smooth, efficient, no wasted motion. "Speed is the enemy," she'd told him. "Precision is what keeps you alive." Remember watching him grow from a clumsy 15-year-old into one of the finest shooters she'd ever trained. Remember his laugh, his questions, his absolute certainty that the world could be made better if people just learned to defend themselves properly. Remember finding him in the street after the Burke gang left. 3 bullets, clean shots, professional work. He'd been fast and precise in everything she'd taught him to be, and it hadn't mattered. She folded the jacket carefully, put it back in the trunk. Tomorrow, she wouldn't wear it. Tomorrow, she'd face Calder as herself. Not as the ghost of who she used to be, but as the woman she'd become. Flawed, broken, carrying 7 years of guilt and a desperate hope that maybe this time she could do it right. Sunday morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. Evelyn woke before dawn, dressed in simple clothes, canvas pants, worn boots, a shirt that allowed free movement. Nothing fancy, nothing that marked her as different. She braided her gray hair tight against her skull, checked her hands for steadiness, they were steady, and walked downstairs to wait. The Lucky Strike was empty. The whole street was empty. Red Hollow had listened, had trusted her enough to hide themselves away and let her face what was coming alone. She sat at a table near the window, watched the sun climb, thought about Daniel Wu, alive and working as a marshal in California, thought about all the students she'd trained who hadn't died in Santa Fe, the ones who'd graduated before the Burke gang arrived, the ones who'd taken her lessons and made them mean something. Maybe her teaching hadn't been worthless after all. Maybe the failure wasn't in the method, but in her inability to accept that violence, even controlled violence, sometimes ended badly. That you could do everything right and still lose. The acceptance of that, the deep, bone-level acceptance, felt like setting down a weight she'd carried for 7 years. Around 11, she saw the dust cloud on the horizon. Calder was coming. She stood up, walked out onto the porch of the Lucky Strike, stood there in the morning sun, waiting, her hands loose at her sides, her breathing slow and even, her mind clear and focused in a way it hadn't been since Santa Fe. The dust cloud resolved into riders. Lots of them. She counted quickly, 18 men, including Calder. More than Deputy Hart had warned about. Calder had brought his entire organization. They rode down Main Street in a tight formation, guns visible, faces hard, making a statement, making sure everyone understood what happened to towns that defied Briggs Calder. They pulled up 30 feet from the Lucky Strike, the horses stamping and blowing, the men spreading out into a loose semicircle. Professional, practiced, dangerous. Briggs Calder dismounted slowly. His face was cold fury barely held in check. "Evelyn Cross," he said, you made a serious mistake." "Did I?" "You embarrassed my men. You threatened my operation. You made people think they could stand up to me." He took a step closer. "Nobody stands up to me. Nobody lives to tell about it." "There's a first time for everything, Briggs." Vernon Pike and Raphael Cord were there, hanging back but watching. Danny Hewitt sat his horse with a rifle across his saddle, looking eager. The rest were men she didn't know, hired guns, mercenaries, the kind of people who killed for money and slept fine afterward. "Last chance," Calder said. "You get on your knees, you apologize. You pay triple what you owe, plus restitution for damages to my reputation, and maybe I let you live." Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, saw the fear beneath the anger, because that's what this was really about, wasn't it? Not money, not control, fear. Fear that if one woman could stand up to him and survive, others might follow. Fear that his empire of intimidation might crack. Fear that he wasn't as strong as everyone thought. "No," she said simply. Calder's hand dropped to his gun. And Evelyn Marlowe, not Cross, not anymore, smiled. "You want to do this in the street, Briggs? You want to make it formal? Fine. But understand something first." She stepped down off the porch, walked toward him slowly, steadily, closing the distance to 20 feet, 15, 10. "I've been running from who I am for 7 years, hiding behind a fake name and a quiet life, pretending I wasn't someone who trained 3 generations of lawmen, someone who taught combat theory to military units, someone who could take apart men like you in her sleep." She stopped, 5 feet away from Calder, close enough to see the doubt creeping into his eyes. "You brought 18 men to kill 1 woman," she said. "That's smart. That's the right call. Because one-on-one, Briggs, you wouldn't last 5 seconds." The street was silent except for the wind and the nervous shifting of horses. "So here's what's going to happen," Evelyn continued. "You're going to draw. You're going to try to kill me, and I'm going to put you down. Then your men are going to have a choice. They can try to avenge you and die in this street, or they can ride away and find honest work. Their call." Calder's face had gone pale. "You're bluffing." "Only one way to find out." His hand twitched toward his gun. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, calm and ready, and absolutely certain. "Draw," she said softly. "Show me what you've got, Briggs. Show me why 18 men follow you. Show me why an entire territory bends knee." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Show me why I should be afraid." Calder drew. He was fast, faster than Vernon, faster than most men she'd ever seen. His hand blurred to his hip, cleared leather, brought the revolver up in a smooth, practiced motion that spoke of years of drilling and drilling and drilling. But Evelyn had taught men faster than Briggs Calder, had trained them, had watched them draw 10,000 times, correcting tiny errors, shaving microseconds, turning natural talent into supernatural skill. She didn't draw, didn't need to. She moved, 1 step forward, inside his arc. Her hand caught his wrist as the gun came level, applied pressure to the nerve cluster, felt his fingers spasm open. The revolver dropped. She caught it with her other hand, thumbed the hammer, and pressed the barrel against Calder's chest in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Total elapsed time, maybe half a second. The entire street froze. Calder stood there, eyes wide, feeling the cold metal against his ribs, understanding for the first time in his life what it meant to be completely, utterly outclassed. "You're right-handed," Evelyn said conversationally, still holding him. "Favor your dominant side. Telegraph your draw with a shoulder dip. And you hold your breath when you're nervous, which slows your reaction time by about 15%. She smiled. "I could have killed you 3 different ways before your hammer fell." Could kill you right now, and your men wouldn't even have time to shoot me. You know it. I know it. Everyone watching knows it. She stepped back, ejected the cylinder, let the bullets fall, tossed the empty gun back to him. But I'm not going to kill you, Briggs. Know why? He couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Because I don't have to. Because from this moment on, every time you look in a mirror, you're going to remember the woman who could have ended you and chose not to. Every time you think about coming back to Red Hollow, you're going to wonder if maybe this time I won't be so merciful. She raised her voice so all 18 men could hear. This town is done paying tribute. This territory is done bleeding for your profit. You want to fight about it? Pick up your gun. Reload. Try again. See what happens. Calder looked at his empty revolver, looked at his men, saw the doubt in their faces, the questions, the fear. He'd brought 18 men to kill one woman, and that woman had just humiliated him without firing a shot. Get out, Evelyn said quietly. Take your men, take your operation, go find some other place to poison, because if I ever see you in Red Hollow again, I won't be this kind. For a long moment, nobody moved. The 18 riders sat their horses. Calder stood in the street with his empty gun. The whole world held its breath. Then Danny Hewitt's voice cut through the silence. Uncle Briggs, we gonna let her— Shut up, Danny. Calder bent down, picked up the bullets, reloaded slowly, his hands shaking, holstered his weapon, mounted his horse without looking at Evelyn. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. He rode out. His men followed. All 18 of them, filing past the Lucky Strike where the quiet woman stood alone in the street, watching them go with eyes that had seen too much and remembered everything. When the last rider disappeared into the dust, Red Hollow erupted. Doors banged open. People poured into the street. Someone was crying. Someone else was laughing. Jake Morrow was trying to speak but couldn't form words. Sarah Chen ran up and threw her arms around Evelyn, sobbing into her shoulder. You did it, Sarah kept saying. You actually did it. But Evelyn knew better. She'd humiliated Calder, broken his mystique, shown his men that he could bleed. But she hadn't ended him, hadn't stopped him, just pushed the problem down the road and hoped it wouldn't come back worse. That night, as Red Hollow celebrated its freedom with drinks and music and desperate relieved joy, Evelyn sat alone in her room and stared at Marcus's jacket. She'd kept her vow, hadn't killed, hadn't even injured, had controlled the violence with precision and walked away clean. But the cost, the toll on her soul, the reopening of old wounds, that was something she'd be paying for a long time. Deputy Hart showed up around midnight. That was something, he said. That was necessary. Calder's going to come back, you know. Maybe not tomorrow or next week, but eventually. Men like him don't forget. I know. So what are you going to do? Evelyn looked out her window at the celebrating town, at people who were standing a little taller, speaking a little louder, daring to hope for the first time in years. I'm going to teach them, she said, going to show them what I showed Calder, that violence isn't about speed or strength. It's about discipline, control, knowing when to fight and when to walk away. And when you do fight, making it count. Hart smiled. The territory could use more teachers like you. The territory could use fewer students who need teaching. He tipped his hat and left her to her thoughts. In the street below, Red Hollow danced and sang and celebrated its freedom, not knowing that the real work, the hard work of staying free, was just beginning. The celebration lasted 3 days, but Evelyn's peace lasted about 3 hours. She woke Monday morning to find 7 people waiting outside the Lucky Strike. They stood in a loose group, nervous and determined in equal measure, and when she opened the door, they all started talking at once. Teach us. Show us what you did. My daughter, she needs to know how to protect herself. Evelyn held up a hand. The voices stopped. 7 faces looked at her with desperate hope, like she was water and they'd been dying of thirst for years. No, she said. The word landed like a stone in still water. Ripples of confusion spread across their faces. But you said— That was Thomas Chen, his bruises fading to yellow and green. Last night you said you were going to teach us. I said I was going to teach the town to stay free. I didn't say I was going to turn you into gunfighters. Then what are you going to teach? Sarah stood beside her husband, arms crossed. How to pour drinks. How to hide. We've been doing that for years, and it got us nowhere. Evelyn looked at them. Really looked at them. Thomas Chen, 50-something, built like a scarecrow. Sarah, barely 5 feet tall, probably never held a gun in her life. A ranch hand named Pete, whose hands shook from too much cheap whiskey. A widow named Margaret, whose husband had died trying to stand up to Calder's men 2 years ago. 2 younger men she didn't know by name, eager and stupid the way young men always were. And standing slightly apart from the others, watching with calculating eyes, was a girl, maybe 16. Dressed in men's clothes, her dark hair cut short, her face all hard angles and barely contained rage. "Who are you?" Evelyn asked her. "Lucy Brennan. My father was the deputy here before Calder killed him." "I remember. Bill Brennan. Good man." "He was." Lucy's voice was flat, dead. "They shot him in the back, made it look like he'd run. Everyone knew the truth, but nobody did anything because everyone was too scared." She took a step forward. "I'm not scared. Not anymore. You showed us it's possible to fight back, so teach me how." And there it was. The same fire that had burned in Marcus. The same absolute certainty that training and skill could make a difference. The same idealism that got people killed. Evelyn should have sent them away. Should have locked the door and gone back to pretending she was nobody. Should have learned from Santa Fe that teaching people to fight only led to more graves. But she looked at Lucy Brennan's face and saw her own younger self staring back. Saw the anger and the pain and the desperate need to make the world make sense again. And she knew that if she turned this girl away, Lucy would try anyway, would practice in secret, would make mistakes, would probably get herself killed doing something brave and stupid. At least if Evelyn taught her, she might live through it. "All right," she heard herself say, "but we do this my way, my rules. No arguments." 7 heads nodded in unison. "First rule, this isn't about revenge. This isn't about becoming fast enough to outdraw the next Vernon Pike who rides through. This is about discipline, about knowing when to fight and when to walk away, about surviving." She looked at Lucy specifically. "About living, not dying." "I can live with that," Lucy said. "Second rule, if I tell you to stop, you stop. If I tell you you're not ready, you're not ready. I'm not training an army. I'm training people who can protect this town without burning it down in the process." More nods. Thomas Chen was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Third rule, we train in private. No spectators, no bragging, no showing off. What we do stays between us until everyone's ready. The last thing we need is Calder hearing that Red Hollow's building a militia." "He's going to hear eventually," Sarah pointed out. "Eventually, yes. But by then, you'll actually know what you're doing." "Maybe." Evelyn sighed. "Meet me behind the livery stable tomorrow at dawn. Bring comfortable clothes, no guns. We're starting from the beginning." They scattered, excited and chattering, all except Lucy, who lingered on the porch. "You don't think we can do it?" the girl said. "Not a question. I think you're all going to be slower and weaker and less coordinated than you imagine. I think half of you will quit in a week. And I think the ones who stick with it will realize that real fighting, not drunken brawls or quick draw contests, but actual survival combat, is terrifying and exhausting and nothing like the stories." Evelyn met Lucy's eyes. "But yes, if you work hard enough and listen well enough, you might just survive the next time Calder comes back. If that's good enough for you, I'll do my best." Lucy smiled. It was a hard smile, old beyond her years. "That's good enough?" The next morning, 9 people showed up behind the livery stable. The original 7 plus 2 more, a Mexican vaquero named Carlos, who worked at the Chen store, and a Cheyenne woman named Susan, who lived on the edge of town and kept to herself. Evelyn looked at them standing in the pre-dawn darkness, shivering slightly in the cool air, and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a yoke. "Tell me why you're here," she said. They went around the circle. Thomas wanted to protect his wife and his store. Sarah wanted to stop feeling helpless. Pete the ranch hand wanted to prove he was worth something. Margaret the widow wanted to make sure no other woman lost her husband the way she had. The 2 young men, brothers named Jim and Frank Porter, wanted to be heroes. Carlos said simply, "I'm tired of running." Susan said nothing at all, just looked at Evelyn with eyes that had seen too much and decided that silence was safer than explanation. Lucy Brennan said, "I want to kill the men who murdered my father." The honesty was startling. Everyone else had dressed up their motivations in noble language, but Lucy just laid it bare. Revenge, pure and simple. Evelyn walked over to her, looked down at the girl who barely came up to her shoulder. "No," she said. "What? You want revenge? Go buy a gun and shoot them in their sleep. Don't waste my time learning discipline if all you want is blood." Lucy's face flushed red. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. I've trained dozens of kids like you, angry, hurting, looking for something that makes the pain stop." Evelyn's voice was gentle but implacable. "But revenge won't fix it. Won't bring your father back, won't make you whole. It'll just create more orphans and more widows and more people standing where you're standing right now." "Then what am I supposed to do with it?" Lucy's voice cracked. "The anger, the hate, what am I supposed to do?" "Channel it. Control it. Use it to make sure nobody else's father gets shot in the back." Evelyn put a hand on the girl's shoulder. "But that means you have to be better than the men who killed him. Smarter, more disciplined, more willing to walk away from a fight you could win because winning would make you just like them." Lucy was crying now, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "I don't know if I can do that." "Then leave, because I won't train someone who's just going to get herself killed proving a point." For a long moment, Lucy stood there trembling with rage and grief and indecision. Then slowly, she wiped her eyes and nodded. "Teach me," she whispered. "Teach me to be better." Evelyn squeezed her shoulder once, then stepped back to address the group. "We're going to start with the basics. Not shooting, not fighting, breathing." Jim Porter laughed. "Breathing? We already know how to breathe. You know how to breathe when you're calm and safe and standing around talking. You don't know how to breathe when someone's pointing a gun at your chest and your heart's trying to punch through your ribs and every instinct is screaming at you to run." Evelyn demonstrated. Slow inhale through the nose, slower exhale through the mouth. Combat breathing. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. It slows your heart rate, clears your mind, gives you the extra second you need to make a smart decision instead of a fatal one. They practiced. It felt ridiculous at first. 9 adults standing in a field breathing like they were at a meditation retreat. But Evelyn watched them closely, correcting posture, adjusting rhythm, and gradually they began to understand. After an hour of just breathing exercises, she moved them into balance drills. Standing on one foot, weight distribution, center of gravity. Nothing dramatic, nothing that looked like fighting. Frank Porter was getting frustrated. "When do we learn to shoot?" "When you can stand still without falling over." "I can stand still just fine." "Can you?" Evelyn walked up to him, put one finger against his shoulder, and pushed gently. He stumbled back 3 steps. "You're off balance. Weight too far forward. Someone shoves you in a fight, you'll go down easy. Someone shoots at you and you try to dodge. You'll trip over your own feet." She spent the next hour teaching them how to move, how to shift weight smoothly, how to turn without losing balance, how to fall without breaking something. Basic body mechanics that had nothing to do with violence and everything to do with control. By the time the sun was fully up, they were all sweating and sore and looking at her like she'd lost her mind. "This is what you did to Calder?" Thomas Chen asked. "Breathing exercises and balance drills? This is what I built on for 20 years before I faced Calder. You think skill happens overnight? You think I just woke up one day and knew how to disarm a man twice my size?" Evelyn shook her head. "Speed doesn't come from rushing. It comes from eliminating wasted motion, from training your body to move efficiently even when your mind is screaming panic, from doing the boring, repetitive basics until they become automatic." Sarah Chen was nodding slowly. "Like learning to cook. You don't start with fancy recipes. You start with how to hold a knife." "Exactly. And just like cooking, if you skip the fundamentals, you'll end up cutting yourself." Evelyn looked at each of them in turn. "We'll meet here every morning for 2 hours. After 6 months, if you're ready, we'll move to actual defensive techniques. After a year, maybe, I'll teach you how to handle a weapon safely. But we go slow. We go careful. Or we don't go at all." That night, Deputy Hart came by the Lucky Strike again. He sat at the bar, nursing a whiskey and watching Evelyn work with that same calculating expression. "Heard you're starting a school," he said. "Heard wrong. I'm teaching a few people some basic skills. There's a difference." "Is there?" Hart smiled. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're doing exactly what you did in Santa Fe, training people to stand up for themselves. Santa Fe ended with everyone dead. Santa Fe ended because the Burke gang brought overwhelming force against students who weren't ready. That doesn't mean the teaching was wrong, just means the timing was bad. Evelyn set down the glass she'd been polishing. You trying to make me feel better about getting kids killed, Deputy? I'm trying to make you see that what happened wasn't your fault. Burke was a monster. Monsters do monstrous things. You gave your students a fighting chance. That's more than most teachers can say. A fighting chance that got them killed. A fighting chance that saved Daniel Wu's life, and probably others you don't even know about. Hart finished his whiskey. How many students did you train over the years? 50? 100? 87? And how many died in Santa Fe? 12. The number was burned into her memory. 12 names she recited every night before sleep. 12 faces she saw in her dreams. So 75 of your students are still out there, still using what you taught them, still making the world a little bit safer. Hart stood up. Maybe instead of counting the dead, you should count the living. He left before she could respond. The days fell into a pattern. Mornings behind the livery stable, teaching balance and breathing and body mechanics to 9 determined adults. Afternoons running the Lucky Strike, which was suddenly busier than it had been in years. Evenings alone with her thoughts and her guilt and the growing fear that she was making the same mistakes all over again. 3 weeks in, Margaret the widow dropped out. I'm too old for this, she said, rubbing her sore knees. I'll protect my home with a shotgun and hope for the best. Evelyn didn't try to stop her. Teaching wasn't about forcing people. It was about giving them tools and letting them decide. 6 weeks in, they started actual defensive techniques. Not fighting, defending. How to block a punch. How to deflect a grab. How to create distance and escape. Lucy Brennan took to it like she was born for it, her small size and quick reflexes making her surprisingly effective. The Porter brothers were enthusiastic but sloppy. Carlos moved with a grace that suggested he'd been in more than a few fights before. Susan remained silent but absorbed everything, her movements precise and controlled. 2 months in, word started spreading. Not just in Red Hollow, but beyond. Other towns heard about what happened with Calder. About the woman who'd humiliated the territory's most feared criminal without firing a shot. About the training sessions behind the livery stable. And with the word came interest. A man wrote in from Silver Springs, asking if Evelyn would teach his daughter. A family from Denver sent a letter offering money for lessons. Deputy Hart mentioned that several lawmen he knew were interested in advanced training. Evelyn turned them all down. She had 9 students. That was enough. That was all she could handle without losing focus, without making mistakes. But the requests kept coming. 3 months in, they graduated to weapons safety. Not drawing, not shooting, just how to hold a revolver properly, how to clear a jam, how to tell if a gun was loaded, basic mechanics. Lucy chafed at the slow pace. When do we actually learn to shoot? When you can field strip that Colt blindfolded and tell me the 7 most common reasons for misfire. That's not fair. Fair is a place with pigs and cotton candy. This is survival. But Evelyn softened the words with a slight smile. You're doing well, Lucy, better than I expected. But speed kills. Not just your enemy, but you. So we go slow. 4 months in, Briggs Calder came back. Not to Red Hollow, to Silver Springs, 30 miles north. He burned down the sheriff's office, killed a deputy, and left a message nailed to the courthouse door. This is what happens to towns that harbor traitors. The message was clearly meant for Red Hollow. For Evelyn. A promise that he hadn't forgotten. That he was just biding his time. Deputy Hart brought the news personally. He's rebuilding, Hart said. Recruiting new men, setting up operations in the Eastern Territories where the law's even thinner. And he's telling everyone that Red Hollow betrayed him, that you humiliated him, that he's going to come back and make an example. Evelyn felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the weight of knowing that her actions had consequences beyond what she'd intended, that by standing up to Calder, she'd painted a target on an entire town. When? She asked. Could be months, could be years. Calder's patient when he wants to be. He'll wait until he's built up enough force that he can't lose. Then he'll come. Then we better be ready. That night, she gathered her students behind the livery stable, told them what was coming. watched their faces cycle through fear and determination and everything in between. "You can leave," she told them. "Nobody would blame you. Pack up, move to another territory, start fresh somewhere Calder doesn't have a grudge." Nobody moved. "Or you can stay. Keep training. Get ready for the day when Calder decides to come back. But understand, if you stay, you might die. Training reduces the odds, but it doesn't eliminate them. And I can't promise you'll survive what's coming." Still nobody moved. Finally, Thomas Chen spoke up. "We've been running our whole lives. Hiding, bending knee to every bully who rode through. I'm tired, Evelyn. We're all tired. So maybe we die fighting. At least we die standing up." The others nodded. Even Pete the ranch hand, whose hands shook less these days but still shook. Even the Porter brothers, who were finally starting to understand that being a hero wasn't about glory. Even Susan, who still hadn't spoken more than 10 words but showed up every morning without fail. Lucy Brennan stepped forward. "My father died because nobody would stand with him, because this town was too scared to fight back. I'm not letting that happen again. So teach us, Evelyn. Teach us everything. Make us good enough that when Calder comes, he regrets it." And there it was, the moment she'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. The moment when she had to decide if she was going to hide from her past or embrace it, if she was going to keep running or make a stand. She thought about Marcus, about the other students who died in Santa Fe, about the guilt she'd carried for 7 years like a cross. But she also thought about Daniel Wu, alive and working as a marshal, about the 75 students Hart had reminded her about the fact that maybe, just maybe, her teaching had done more good than harm. "All right," she said, "no more basics. Starting tomorrow, we train like Calder's coming next week. We train until you can move without thinking, until defense becomes instinct, until you're good enough that when the fight comes, you survive it." They trained harder after that. 2 hours became 3, became 4. Morning sessions stretched into afternoon. Evelyn taught them everything she knew about reading an opponent, about controlling distance, about using environment as weapon. She taught them that fights were won in the mind before the first punch was thrown. That confidence was just as important as skill. That sometimes the best defense was making your opponent believe you were more dangerous than you actually were. Lucy became her best student. The girl had natural talent combined with a work ethic that bordered on obsessive. She practiced in her spare time, drilled movements until they were perfect, asked questions that showed genuine understanding of the principles behind the techniques. "You remind me of someone," Evelyn told her one day. "Who?" "A student I had in Santa Fe. Marcus. He had the same fire, the same dedication." "What happened to him?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then, "He died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Died because he believed training could overcome overwhelming force. Died because I taught him that skill mattered more than numbers." "Did you teach him wrong?" "I don't know. He saved 3 people before they killed him. Drew off the Burt gang long enough for others to escape. So maybe he died for something, or maybe he just died." She looked at Lucy. "That's the thing about this life. You don't always get to know if you made a difference. You just do your best and hope it's enough." 5 months in, a stranger rode into Red Hollow. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of weathered face that came from hard living. He wore a deputy's badge and carried himself with the careful confidence of someone who knew what they were doing. He found Evelyn at the Lucky Strike and introduced himself as Daniel Wu. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, just stared at the man standing in front of her, the boy she'd trained a decade ago, now grown into something strong and capable and alive. "Marshal Wu now, actually," he said with a shy smile. "Just got the promotion, but I heard you were here, heard what you did to Briggs Calder, and I had to come see for myself if it was really you." "Daniel..." His name came out rough, choked with emotion she'd kept buried for years. "I thought... After Santa Fe, I thought... I wasn't there that day. You'd sent me to Carson City with letters. By the time I got back..." He stopped, swallowed, hard. "By the time I got back, it was over. The Burt gang was gone. Everyone was dead, and you disappeared. I couldn't stay, couldn't face what had happened. I know, I looked for you. Spent 2 years trying to find you. Wanted to tell you that it wasn't your fault. That what you taught us, what you taught me, saved my life a dozen times over." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn journal. Her handwriting, her notes. I kept this. Read it so many times the pages are falling apart. Everything you taught about discipline over aggression, control over chaos, it made me a better lawman, better person. Evelyn took the journal with shaking hands. It was one of hers, from the Santa Fe days, full of combat theory and philosophy and all the idealistic notions about making violence serve life. I failed you, she said. Failed all of you. No, ma'am. You gave us tools. What happened to the others? That wasn't your failure. That was Burke's evil. And the fact that I survived, that I'm standing here wearing a marshal's badge and trying to do some good in this world, that's because of you. They talked for hours about Santa Fe and the years after, about Daniel's career as a lawman and the students he'd trained in turn using her methods, about the letter Deputy Hart had sent, telling him that his old teacher was alive and fighting the good fight in Red Hollow. I want to help, Daniel said finally. However I can. I've got 2 weeks before I need to be in Sacramento. Let me work with your students. Show them what your training looks like in practice. So for 2 weeks, Daniel Wu trained alongside Evelyn's 9 students, showed them real-world scenarios, demonstrated how to read a hostile situation, shared stories about using minimal force to achieve maximum effect, and most importantly, showed them that Evelyn's methods worked, that discipline could beat aggression, that a smaller, weaker person could survive against larger, stronger opponents if they were smart enough and trained enough. Lucy absorbed everything Daniel taught like a sponge. The Porter brothers stopped being quite so reckless. Even Pete's hands shook less when Daniel walked them through handling dangerous situations without drawing a weapon. On Daniel's last day, he pulled Evelyn aside. "They're good," he said. "Not ready for Burke gang-level threats, but good enough to handle most trouble. And with more time, they could be exceptional. I'm trying not to get them killed, I know. And that caution will serve them well. But Evelyn, don't let fear of what happened in Santa Fe stop you from doing what you do best. The world needs teachers like you, needs people willing to show others how to stand up without becoming monsters themselves." He left the next morning, promising to return if he could, promising to spread word about what was happening in Red Hollow to other lawmen who might be interested, promising that her methods were reaching further than she knew. After he was gone, Evelyn found Lucy practicing behind the livery stable in the pre-dawn darkness. "Couldn't sleep?" Evelyn asked. "Didn't want to. Daniel said muscle memory comes from repetition, so I'm repeating." Evelyn watched the girl run through a defensive sequence, noting the improvements, the confidence, the way Lucy moved like someone who knew her body could be trusted. "You're going to be good at this," Evelyn said. "Maybe better than good." "Better than Marcus?" The question caught her off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because I want to know if I can be good enough. Good enough to make a difference when Calder comes back. Good enough to protect this town the way my father couldn't." Evelyn thought about how to answer, thought about Marcus's skill and Marcus's death and the complicated relationship between the two. "Marcus was brilliant," she finally said. "Fast, precise, smart, but he was also idealistic in a way that made him take risks he shouldn't have taken. He believed so strongly in doing the right thing that he sometimes forgot to survive the doing." She met Lucy's eyes. "You're different. You're angry, yes. Hurting, yes. But underneath that, you're practical. You want to live. That might make you better than Marcus ever was, because the best fighters aren't the ones willing to die. They're the ones determined to live." Lucy nodded slowly, processing this. Then she went back to practicing, and Evelyn went back to watching, and the sun came up on Red Hollow like it had every day for 100 years. Indifferent to human struggle, indifferent to human hope, just marking time while people tried to make something better from something broken. 6 months in, they held their first real sparring session. Not full contact fighting, Evelyn still wouldn't allow that, but controlled exchanges where students had to defend against realistic attacks. Lucy held her own against Carlos, who had 40 pounds on her. Thomas surprised everyone by using his height advantage intelligently. Sarah proved that technique could absolutely compensate for size. And watching them, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Pride. Not in herself, never that, but in them, in their growth, in their determination, in the fact that they'd taken what she taught and made it their own. That night, she opened Marcus's journal, the one Daniel had returned to her, and read her own words from a decade ago. "Violence should always be the last resort, but when it becomes necessary, let it be swift, controlled, and in service of life rather than death. Teach your students not just how to fight, but when to fight. And more importantly, when to walk away. She'd written that after her first year teaching, when she still believed the world could be made better through discipline and training. Before Santa Fe, before she learned that sometimes the world just breaks you and there's nothing you can do but survive it. But maybe, she thought, closing the journal, maybe she'd been wrong about that too. Maybe the world broke everyone eventually, and maybe the point wasn't to avoid the breaking, but to teach people how to put themselves back together afterward, how to stand up after being knocked down, how to keep fighting for something better even when better seemed impossible. That's what she was really teaching these 9 students. Not how to fight, how to survive, how to rebuild, how to turn broken places like Red Hollow into something worth protecting. It wasn't heroic, wasn't dramatic, wasn't the kind of story people told around campfires, but it was real, and real was what mattered. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 8 months after Evelyn had humiliated Briggs Calder in the street. It was delivered by a boy from Silver Springs, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. The envelope was sealed with red wax and addressed in careful script to the woman who teaches. Evelyn opened it standing on the porch of the Lucky Strike while her students gathered for their morning session. Inside was a single page, the handwriting precise and controlled. To the teacher in Red Hollow. My name is Catherine Reeves. I run a boarding house in Prospect, 2 territories east. Last month, 3 of Briggs Calder's men came through demanding protection money we couldn't pay. They hurt my son, broke his arm in 2 places for the crime of being too slow to empty his pockets. I heard what you did. Heard you stood up to Calder and lived. Heard you're teaching others to do the same. I'm writing to ask if you'd consider coming to Prospect. We have money. Not much, but enough to pay for your time. We have people willing to learn. What we don't have is hope. And I think maybe you could teach us that too. Please. We're desperate. The signature was shaky, like the woman had been crying while she wrote. Evelyn folded the letter carefully and looked up to find 9 pairs of eyes watching her. What is it? Lucy asked. A request. From another town. She handed the letter to Thomas Chen, let it pass around the circle, watched their faces as they read, watched hope and fear war across their expressions. You should go, Sarah said finally. I can't leave Red Hollow. Calder could come back any time. So we'll be ready, Sarah gestured to the others. You've been training us for 8 months. We're not helpless anymore. And that town, Prospect, they need you more than we do right now. She's right, Thomas added. What you've done here, what you've taught us, it's bigger than just Red Hollow. Other towns are suffering the same way we did. They deserve a chance too. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to point out that 8 months of training didn't make them ready for what Calder would bring, that leaving now was reckless, that she'd already failed one group of students and couldn't bear to fail another. But looking at their faces, at the confidence that hadn't been there before, at the way they stood straighter and spoke louder, she realized they were right. They weren't the broken, scared people who'd first come to her. They'd become something harder, something capable. 2 weeks, she said. I'll go to Prospect for 2 weeks. Work with their people. See if they're serious about learning or just looking for a quick fix. And if they're serious, Lucy's eyes were bright with something that looked like pride, then maybe we start thinking bigger. Not just Red Hollow, not just Prospect. Maybe we start thinking about a network, towns that look out for each other. People trained well enough to protect themselves without becoming the next Briggs Calder. Deputy Hart showed up that afternoon, somehow already knowing about the letter. Word traveled fast in the territory, especially when it concerned the woman who'd made Calder bleed. You going to Prospect? He asked. Thinking about it. Good. I know Catherine Reeves. Good woman. Lost her husband to cholera 3 years ago. Been running that boarding house solo ever since, raising 2 boys on her own. Calder's men roughed up the older one, kids maybe 14, broke his arm like the letter said, but also bruised his ribs and gave him a concussion. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Why didn't she write to the law? Because the nearest marshal is 2 weeks away, and Calder owns the local sheriff. Same story as everywhere else in this territory. The law's got holes in it big enough to drive a herd through, and men like Calder live in those holes. So what am I supposed to do? Train every town between here and the Pacific? Spend my life riding circuit like some kind of combat preacher? Hart smiled. Would that be so bad? You're good at it, and the territory needs it. Needs someone willing to show people they don't have to be victims. I'm one person, Hart. I can't save everyone. No. But you can teach people to save themselves. That's what you did here. That's what Daniel Wu's doing in California. That's what could happen in Prospect and Silver Springs and every other town bleeding under Calder's operation. He leaned forward. You built something in Red Hollow, something that matters. Now the question is whether you're brave enough to let it spread. She thought about that conversation for 3 days. Thought about Catherine Reeves and her injured son. Thought about all the other Catherine Reeves in all the other towns suffering in silence because they didn't know they had options. Thought about Marcus and the other students who died in Santa Fe, and whether their deaths meant she should stop teaching or teach better. On Friday morning, she gathered her students behind the livery stable. I'm going to Prospect, she told them. I'll be gone 2 weeks, maybe 3. While I'm away, Lucy's in charge of training sessions. Lucy's eyes went wide. Me? But I'm not. You're the best student I have. You know the drills. You understand the principles. And more importantly, the others respect you. Evelyn looked at the rest of the group. You listen to her. You train hard. You don't slack off just because I'm not here watching. Understood? They nodded, some more enthusiastically than others. The Porter brothers looked like they wanted to argue about Lucy being in charge. She was younger than them, and a woman besides. But a look from Evelyn shut them up. One more thing, Evelyn said. While I'm gone, I want you to start thinking about what comes next. Calder will return eventually. We know that. So we need a plan. Not just for fighting him, for making sure Red Hollow stays free afterward. How do we protect the town long term? How do we handle other threats? How do we build something that lasts beyond just surviving the next crisis? You're talking about making this permanent, Thomas said slowly. Making Red Hollow a place that doesn't need to fear men like Calder. I'm talking about making Red Hollow a place where men like Calder know better than to start trouble, where the cost of coming here outweighs any profit they might make, where strength comes from unity and training, not from whoever has the most guns. It was an idealistic vision, the kind of thing Marcus would have loved, the kind of thing that got people killed when reality crashed into it. But maybe, Evelyn thought, maybe idealism only got you killed when you weren't prepared for the crash. Maybe the problem wasn't having hope. It was having hope without the skills to back it up. She left for Prospect the next morning, rode out on a borrowed horse with her saddlebags packed light and her mind heavy with doubt. The journey took 2 days through rough country, and she spent the time thinking about what she'd say to these people, how much she could teach in 2 weeks, whether she was making a terrible mistake. Prospect turned out to be smaller than Red Hollow, maybe 200 people clinging to life around a played-out copper mine. The buildings were more weathered, the people more beaten down, the atmosphere thicker with despair. Catherine Reeves met her at the edge of town. She was 40-something, rail-thin, with eyes that had seen too much and hands that never stopped moving. Her older son stood beside her, his arm in a splint, his face still showing the yellow-green fade of serious bruising. You came, Catherine said, and there were tears in her voice. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. But you did. That's what matters. Catherine gestured toward the boarding house. I've gathered some people, folks who want to learn, folks who are tired of being afraid. The group that assembled in Catherine's dining room made Red Hollow's original 9 look like a professional militia. There were 12 of them, 3 women, 9 men, ranging from barely 20 to well past 60. None of them looked like they'd ever won a fight in their lives. Most looked like they'd never even thrown a punch. Evelyn stood at the front of the room and studied them. Saw the desperation, saw the hope, saw the same broken spirit she'd seen in Red Hollow 8 months ago. I'm not going to lie to you, she said. 2 weeks isn't enough time to make you good. Isn't even enough time to make you competent. But it might be enough to teach you the basics, enough to show you that fighting back is possible, enough to give you a foundation to build on. That's more than we have now, said an older man with a weathered face. Right now, we've got nothing but fear and empty pockets. Then let's start with something simple. Show me how you breathe. She spent the first 3 days on fundamentals. Breathing, balance, body mechanics. The same boring, repetitive basics she'd drilled into Red Hollow. Some of the students got frustrated, wanted to skip ahead to the dramatic stuff, wanted to learn how to disarm a gunman or throw a perfect punch. She refused. Made them drill the basics until they were sick of it. Made them understand that everything else, all the advanced techniques, all the clever tricks, was built on this foundation. On the fourth day, she started teaching them to read situations, how to spot trouble before it started, how to position yourself in a room, how to identify exits, how to recognize the signs that someone was about to turn violent. Most fights can be avoided if you're smart, she told them. And the fights that can't be avoided are the ones where you need every advantage you can get. That starts with awareness, knowing what's happening around you, not being the easy target. Catherine's son, his name was Michael, absorbed everything like he was dying of thirst. He was left-handed, which meant his broken right arm didn't slow him down as much as it could have. He practiced the drills with an intensity that reminded Evelyn of Lucy. "Why are you working so hard?" she asked him after one session. "Because next time Calder's men come through, I'm not going to be helpless. Next time, I'm going to make them regret it." She heard Marcus in those words, heard the same righteous anger, the same belief that training could overcome evil. "Michael, listen to me. The goal isn't revenge. The goal is survival. You understand the difference? I understand that they hurt me because they could, because nobody stopped them, because this whole town just bent over and took it." His jaw was set hard. "That's not happening again." "Good. As long as you're fighting to protect, not to punish, as long as you remember that the best victory is the one where nobody dies, including you." He nodded, but she could see the anger still burning behind his eyes, could see the same fire that had gotten Marcus killed. She made a mental note to work with him separately, to try to channel that rage into something productive before it consumed him. The second week, she introduced actual defensive techniques. Basic blocks. Simple escapes from grabs. Nothing fancy. Nothing that required years of practice. Just practical skills that might save their lives. And she taught them about fear, how to recognize it, how to breathe through it, how to use it as fuel instead of letting it paralyze them. "Fear's information," she told them. "It's your body telling you that something's wrong, that you need to pay attention. The problem isn't feeling afraid, it's letting the fear control you. You learn to acknowledge it, breathe through it, and act anyway. That's what separates someone who survives from someone who freezes." On the 10th day, 3 of Calder's men rode into Prospect. They weren't the same ones who'd hurt Michael, just random enforcers making their rounds, collecting tribute, reminding people who owned them. They swaggered into Catherine's boarding house like they owned the place, demanding food and drink and money. Evelyn was upstairs when they arrived, heard the commotion, heard Catherine's voice, tight with fear, but trying to stay calm, heard one of the men laugh and say something crude. She came down the stairs slowly, deliberately. Let them see her coming. Let them see the woman who'd humiliated their boss 8 months ago. The laughter died. The tallest of the 3 men, a scarred brute with dead eyes, recognized her immediately. His hand dropped to his gun. "You're a long way from Red Hollow," he said. "Just passing through, teaching some folks how to stand up straight." Evelyn stopped at the bottom of the stairs, hands loose at her sides. "You boys looking for trouble? Or can this stay civil? Calder's got a bounty on you. $500 for anyone who brings you back to him, alive or dead, don't matter which." "500? I'm flattered. That's almost enough to buy a decent horse." She smiled. "Of course, you'd have to collect it first. And collecting means taking me. Think you can do that?" The scarred man's face went red. His companions shifted nervously. They'd heard the stories. Everyone had heard the stories. The question was whether pride or common sense would win out. Behind Evelyn, on the stairs, Michael Reeves was watching. So were several of her other students. Learning, observing, seeing how she handled this. "We don't want trouble," the scarred man finally said. The words cost him, she could tell. Cost him pride. Cost him face in front of his men. Just collecting what's owed. Nothing's owed, not anymore. Prospect's done paying tribute to men who contribute nothing but fear. Evelyn took a step forward. "So you can ride out now? Tell Calder this town's closed for business. Or you can try something stupid and see how that works out." The tension stretched. One of the other men, younger, stupider, started to draw. Evelyn moved, not dramatically, not fast enough to seem threatening, just shifted her weight, closed the distance, and caught his wrist before the gun cleared leather. Applied pressure, felt his fingers spasm open, caught the revolver as it fell. "Like I said, stupid." She ejected the cylinder, let the bullets fall, handed the empty gun back. "Now, you boys have a choice. Leave peacefully or learn what I taught Briggs Calder about humility. Your call. They left, scrambling more than walking, their horses kicking up dust as they fled down the main street. The students erupted in cheers. Michael was grinning ear to ear. Catherine Reeves looked like she might cry with relief. But Evelyn felt only the familiar weight of consequence settling on her shoulders. Those men would report back to Calder, would tell him she was in Prospect, would add fuel to the fire of his rage. She'd just painted a target on another town. That night she gathered the students. What happened today? That changes things. Calder knows I'm here now. Knows Prospect is connected to Red Hollow. He'll add this town to his list of scores to settle. So what do we do? Catherine asked. You train harder. You prepare better. And you start reaching out to other towns. Silver Springs. Redemption. Anywhere Calder's been bleeding dry. You tell them what's happening. Tell them there's another way. Build a network of towns that refuse to be victims. A network, one of the older men said slowly. Like a mutual defense pact. Exactly. Calder's power comes from isolation. From making each town think they're alone. That nobody will help. That resistance is suicide. But if towns start standing together, watching each other's backs, sharing information, that changes the math. Makes it too expensive for Calder to operate. You're talking about a war, Michael said. I'm talking about deterrence, about making the cost of violence too high, about showing men like Calder that there are easier targets elsewhere. Evelyn looked at each of them in turn. But yes, if Calder doesn't back down, if he decides to make a statement, then it could turn into a war, and people will die. That's the reality. That's what you're signing up for. Nobody left. They were scared. She could see it in their faces. But they were also tired. Tired of being afraid, tired of bending knee, tired of watching their children get hurt while they did nothing. She spent the last 3 days teaching them everything she could, showed them how to set up watch rotations, how to fortify buildings, how to create choke points and kill zones without turning their town into a fortress, gave them the same strategic thinking she'd used in Red Hollow. And she taught them something else, something she'd learned from her own failures. When the fight comes, and it will come, remember this. Your goal isn't to win, it's to survive. To make the cost of attacking you higher than any profit Calder might gain. You do that by being smart, by fighting as a unit, by protecting each other. She paused. And by knowing when to retreat. There's no shame in falling back, regrouping, living to fight another day. Dead heroes can't protect anyone. On her last evening in Prospect, Catherine found her sitting on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Thank you, Catherine said simply, for coming, for teaching us, for showing us we don't have to be afraid. You should still be afraid. Fear keeps you careful, keeps you smart. But now we're afraid and prepared. That's different. Catherine sat down beside her. Michael's different too. Did you notice? He's still angry, but it's focused now, controlled. He's not just raging at the world. He's got purpose. Purpose can be dangerous. So can despair. I'd rather my son have purpose. Catherine was quiet for a moment. You know what I think? I think you're building something bigger than you realize. Not just teaching people to fight, teaching them to hope. And hope spreads faster than fear ever did. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways hope could get people killed. But sitting there, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and red, she thought about Red Hollow, about the 9 students who'd become 8, who'd become something stronger than any of them had been alone, about Deputy Hart's network of lawmen, about Daniel Wu in California, about all the small acts of resistance happening across the territory. Maybe Catherine was right. Maybe hope did spread. Maybe that was the whole point. She rode back to Red Hollow 2 days later, arriving just before sunset. Found her students gathered at the Lucky Strike waiting for her. They'd kept training while she was gone. Lucy led them through drills every morning. They'd even started teaching some of the newer arrivals. 3 more people from Red Hollow had joined, plus a drifter who'd heard stories and wanted to learn. How was Prospect? Thomas asked. Promising. They're raw, but they're willing, and they're going to start reaching out to other towns, building connections. So it's spreading, Sarah said. What you're teaching, it's actually spreading. Yeah. Evelyn set down her saddlebag. And that means Calder's going to take notice. He already knows I was in Prospect. already knows we're organizing. He'll see it as a threat to his whole operation. Good, Lucy said fiercely. Let him see it. Let him know we're not backing down. Lucy? No, Evelyn, I mean it. For years, Calder's had free run of this territory, bleeding towns dry, hurting people, killing my father and Michael's arm, and everyone else who stood up. It's time someone pushed back, really pushed back. The others were nodding, even the new students who'd barely learned the basics. The anger was building, the frustration, the desire to do something instead of just preparing. And Evelyn recognized the danger in it, recognized the same impulse that had gotten Marcus killed. The belief that righteous anger and good training were enough to overcome superior force. Listen to me, she said, putting steel into her voice. All of you. Anger is good. Anger keeps you motivated. But anger without discipline gets you killed. We train, we prepare, we build our network. And when Calder comes, not if, we face him smart. We face him together. We don't go looking for a fight just because we're tired of waiting. And if he comes tomorrow, one of the new students asked, of the pool, then we'll be as ready as we can be. And we trust in the training, trust in each other, trust that what we've built here is stronger than one man's empire of fear. She wasn't sure she believed that, wasn't sure training and hope and mutual defense pacts could stand against Calder's resources and ruthlessness. But she had to try, had to believe it was possible, because the alternative, accepting that men like Calder always won, that violence always triumphed over discipline, that the strong inevitably crushed the weak, that was a world she refused to live in. That night, alone in her room, she opened Marcus's journal one more time, found the entry she'd written after his death. The angry, guilty, grief-stricken words about how she'd failed him, how her teaching had been worthless, how she should never train anyone again. She read it twice. Then she picked up a pen and wrote beneath it, I was wrong. The teaching wasn't the failure. The failure was in thinking I could control every outcome. Marcus died doing what he believed was right, died protecting people. And while I wish he'd lived, I can't say his choice was wrong, can't say my teaching him was wrong. All I can do is teach better, prepare better, give the next generation every tool I have and trust them to use those tools wisely. That's all any teacher can do. The rest is up to them. She closed the journal, put it back in the trunk with Marcus's jacket and all the other ghosts of her past. Tomorrow she'd train her students, would continue building the network Catherine Reeves had talked about, would prepare Red Hollow and Prospect and every other town that reached out for the day when Briggs Calder decided to make his stand. And when that day came, when the dust settled and the guns went silent and she could count the cost in bodies and broken dreams, she'd deal with the consequences then. For now, there was only the work, the endless grinding work of turning broken people into something stronger, of building hope in places where hope had died, of teaching that violence could be controlled, that strength could serve life instead of death, that even in the darkest territories, light could still break through. It wasn't enough, might never be enough, but it was what she had, and she'd give it everything. Calder came back on a Wednesday in late autumn, exactly 1 year and 2 weeks after Evelyn had humiliated him in the street. He brought 37 men. The dust cloud appeared on the horizon just after dawn, and by the time the sun cleared the mountains, every soul in Red Hollow knew what was coming. The watch rotation Evelyn had established sent runners through town. Doors locked. Children disappeared into root cellars. The streets emptied in minutes, leaving only the people who'd chosen to stand. Evelyn's students, 14 of them now, counting the ones who'd joined after Prospect, plus Deputy Hart, who'd arrived 2 days earlier with a warning that Calder was moving, plus Michael Reeves and his mother Catherine, who'd ridden in from Prospect with 6 of their own trained people, plus a handful of others, ranch hands, drifters, the desperately brave or bravely desperate, who'd heard what was happening and decided they'd rather die standing than live kneeling. 26 people total, against 37. The math wasn't good. Evelyn stood in the street outside the Lucky Strike and watched the riders approach. She'd known this moment was coming for a year, had prepared for it, drilled for it, spent countless hours teaching her students not just how to fight, but how to survive fighting, how to use terrain and numbers and discipline to offset superior force. But knowing and doing were different things. And standing here watching death ride toward her in a cloud of dust and bad intentions, she felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the fear she'd taught her students to breathe through, the doubt she'd never quite managed to silence. Lucy appeared beside her, rifle held loose and ready. The girl had grown over the past year, not just in skill, but in confidence, in understanding. She'd learned to channel her rage into something useful, something controlled. "You ready?" Lucy asked. "No, but we're doing it anyway. That's what you taught us. Act despite the fear." "I taught you a lot of things. Let's hope you remember the important ones." The riders slowed as they entered town. 37 men on horseback, armed to the teeth, their faces hard with purpose. They weren't here to collect tribute. They were here to make an example, to show every town in the territory what happened when you defied Briggs Calder. Calder himself rode at the front, flanked by Vernon Pike and Raphael Cord and Danny Hewitt, the three men Evelyn had humiliated a year ago. They looked hungry for redemption. The riders stopped 50 feet from where Evelyn stood, a careful distance, not close enough for conversation, but not so far they couldn't hear each other. Calder dismounted slowly, taking his time, making everyone wait, making the moment stretch. "Evelyn Cross," he said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "You've been busy this past year." "So have you. 37 men. That's impressive. Must have cost you a fortune in recruitment. Worth every penny. See, I learned something from our last encounter. Learned that you're dangerous, that you can't be handled with just a few men and threats." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "So I brought overwhelming force, enough that your skill won't matter, enough that you can't talk your way out, enough to burn this town to the ground and everyone in it." That's a lot of effort for one woman. This isn't about you anymore. This is about sending a message, about showing every town from here to California what happens when they get ideas about resistance, about organizing, about standing up. He took a step forward. "You started something, Evelyn. Something that threatens my entire operation, so I'm going to end it, going to end you, and then I'm going to end everyone who followed you." Behind Evelyn, her students had taken their positions, spread out along the street, using cover, maintaining sight lines. They drilled this scenario 100 times, knew their roles, knew the plan. But plans were fragile things. They broke the moment real bullets started flying. "You've got one chance," Calder continued. "Surrender now. Come with me peacefully. Let me make an example of you and only you. I'll let the town stand. Let your students live. All you have to do is walk over here and get on your knees." Evelyn almost laughed. "We both know that's not happening, Briggs." "Then you're condemning everyone here to death. Maybe. Or maybe you're about to learn that overwhelming force doesn't always win. That training and discipline and people fighting for their homes can sometimes beat hired guns fighting for money." She shifted her weight slightly. "Either way, we're about to find out." Calder's smile vanished. His hand dropped to his gun. And somewhere, from a rooftop Evelyn couldn't see, a rifle cracked. The shot took the hat off Vernon Pike's head, sent it spinning into the dust. Vernon yelped and dove for cover. His horse bolted. The other riders scattered, grabbing for weapons, looking for the shooter. That was Deputy Hart, firing a warning shot from his concealed position, starting the dance. "Next one's not a warning," Hart's voice echoed from somewhere. "You boys want to leave now? Nobody gets hurt." Calder's face went red with fury. "Kill them! Kill them all!" His men opened fire, rifles and pistols cracking in a ragged volley that tore chunks out of buildings and shattered windows. But Evelyn's people were already in cover, already moving, already responding with controlled, disciplined fire of their own. Lucy's rifle spoke from behind a water trough. Thomas Chen fired from the general store window. Sarah from the Lucky Strike porch. The Prospect people from positions they'd scouted 3 days ago. Not rapid fire, not panicked spraying of bullets. Careful, aimed shots, making every round count. 2 of Calder's men went down in the first exchange. Not dead, Evelyn could see them crawling toward cover, but wounded, out of the fight. The rest scattered, taking positions of their own. This wasn't going to be a quick massacre. This was going to be a siege. For the next 3 hours, Red Hollow turned into hell. Bullets cracked and whined. Buildings burned where muzzle flashes had set dry wood smoldering. Men screamed when they were hit. Horses fled in panic. Smoke from gunfire hung thick in the air, mixing with dust and the copper smell of blood. Evelyn moved through it all like a ghost, never staying in one position long, always flanking, always repositioning, always using her knowledge of the town to stay one step ahead. She didn't fire often, ammunition was precious, But when she did, someone went down, not killed. She aimed for limbs, for weapons, for anything that would take someone out of the fight without killing them. That was the discipline she'd taught, the control that separated them from Calder's men. But discipline had costs. 2 of the Prospect people went down in the first hour. Frank Porter took a bullet to the leg in the second. Pete the ranch hand, hands steady now, finally steady, caught one in the shoulder and had to be dragged to safety by Carlos. The math was still bad. Evelyn's side was taking losses faster than they could inflict them. Calder had more men, more ammunition, more everything. All he had to do was wait them out. Around noon, during a lull in the fighting, Lucy found Evelyn crouched behind the blacksmith's forge. "We're running low on ammunition," the girl said. Her face was streaked with soot and sweat. "Another hour, maybe 2, and we'll be down to knives. How many of Calder's men still fighting?" "I count 23, maybe 24. So they'd taken down 13 or 14, but lost 4 of their own to wounds serious enough to take them out of action. The math was getting worse, not better. "We need to change the game," Evelyn said. "Can't win this through attrition." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Calder wants me specifically, wants to make an example. So maybe I give him what he wants." Lucy's eyes went wide. "No, that's suicide." "That's strategy. I walk out there, draw his focus, create an opening. You and the others use that opening to hit them from the flanks. Take out enough of his men that the rest lose their nerve and run. Or they just shoot you the moment you show yourself." "Maybe, but they won't shoot to kill. Calder wants me alive, wants to parade me around, make a show of it. That gives me time." "Time to do what?" Evelyn smiled. It was a hard smile, the kind Marcus used to give before doing something impossibly brave and impossibly stupid. "Time to remind Briggs Calder why he brought 37 men to kill 1 woman." Before Lucy could argue further, Evelyn stood up and walked into the street. Just walked out, hands at her sides, no weapon drawn, making herself a target. The shooting stopped. Both sides, as if someone had called for a ceasefire. Everyone staring at the woman standing alone in the middle of Main Street, calm as Sunday morning. Calder emerged from behind an overturned wagon, gun drawn but not aimed. "You surrendering?" "I'm offering a deal, you and me. 1-on-1, old-fashioned duel. I win, you and your men ride out and never come back. You win, the town's yours, and my people stand down." "Why would I agree to that?" "I've got you outnumbered and outgunned. Because this is costing you money and men. Because every minute this fight drags on, you look weaker. Because if I can tie you up for a year with 1 town, imagine what I can do with a network of towns. Imagine what happens when word spreads that Briggs Calder needed 37 men and 3 hours and still couldn't put down 1 woman." She paused. "Or you can face me. Prove you're as dangerous as everyone thinks. Win with honor instead of numbers." The appeal to his pride was calculated. Calder was arrogant, vain. He'd spent the past year rebuilding his reputation after she'd humiliated him. The chance to reclaim it in a fair fight, he wanted that, needed it. "All right," he said. "You and me. But when I win, I'm killing everyone anyway, just so we're clear." "Wouldn't expect anything less." They faced each other in the street, 30 feet apart. The watching men on both sides creating a rough circle. Nobody shooting, nobody moving, just waiting. Evelyn had done this before, faced Calder in the street. But last time she'd been calm, certain, sure of her skill. This time was different. This time she was tired. Low on ammunition, wounded. She'd taken a graze across her ribs that burned with every breath. This time the stakes were higher and the odds were worse, but the fundamentals remained the same. Read the opponent, control your breathing, wait for the tell. Calder's hand hovered over his gun. He'd practiced this past year, she could tell. Drilled his draw until it was faster, smoother. He wasn't the sloppy gunman she'd faced before. "Any last words?" he asked. "Just one piece of advice. When you draw, don't hold your breath. Slows your reaction time." His face flushed red. Because she'd called it. Because even now, standing there ready to kill her, he was making the same mistake he'd made a year ago. He drew, fast, faster than Vernon, faster than anyone she'd seen except maybe Daniel Wu. His hand blurred to his hip, cleared leather in a smooth motion that spoke of obsessive practice. But Evelyn had spent a year teaching, spent a year watching her students make mistakes and correcting them, Spent a year thinking about this exact moment. She didn't outdraw him, didn't need to. She moved sideways as his gun came up, a smooth sidestep that took her out of his line of fire. Her own gun, borrowed from Lucy, already drawn and held low, came up as she moved. Calder's shot went wide, missed by 3 inches. Evelyn's shot didn't miss. The bullet took him in the right shoulder, the gun arm. He spun with the impact, his revolver flying from nerveless fingers, his face a mask of shock and pain. He dropped to his knees in the dust for the second time, looking up at her with the same disbelief he'd shown a year ago. "I told you," Evelyn said quietly, walking toward him. "Speed isn't everything. You telegraphed with your shoulder, held your breath, didn't account for lateral movement." She stopped in front of him. "Same mistakes as last time. You didn't learn." Around them, Calder's men were frozen, watching their boss bleed in the street, watching the woman they'd been sent to kill standing over him with a gun. "Here's what's going to happen," Evelyn said, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "Calder's going to get medical attention. Then he's going to ride out of this territory and never come back. His men are going to do the same. Anyone who wants to stay, who wants to make an honest living instead of bleeding towns dry, Red Hollow will give them a chance. But the protection racket, the extortion, the violence for profit, that's done. Over. Finished." "You can't," Calder gasped through the pain. "You can't just—" "I can, and I am. Because you brought 37 men to prove you were stronger than me and lost anyway. Because every town between here and California is watching to see what happens. Because the territory is tired of men like you." She holstered her gun. "You're finished, Briggs. You just don't know it yet." Vernon Pike stepped forward from the watching crowd. His face was conflicted, angry, but also calculating. "Boys," he said to the other men, "I'm thinking maybe Miss Evelyn's got a point. Calder's been bleeding us for wages while he gets rich. Maybe it's time we found honest work." One by one, Calder's men lowered their weapons. Some looked relieved, some looked angry, but none of them looked willing to die for a wounded man who'd just lost everything. The fight was over. The cleanup took days. Treating the wounded, both sides, because Evelyn insisted. Repairing buildings, burying the 3 men who'd died. 2 from Calder's gang and 1 of the Prospect people who'd taken a bullet to the chest. Calder himself was patched up and escorted to the territorial border by Deputy Hart and a squad of newly arrived federal marshals. Hart had sent for them weeks ago, and they'd arrived just in time to mop up the aftermath. The federal case against Calder, built on 2 years of evidence, would keep him in prison for decades. His organization collapsed within a week. Some of his men took Evelyn's offer and stayed in Red Hollow, learning honest trades. Others drifted to other territories, looking for easier marks. But the protection racket that had bled the territory dry for 3 years was done. In the aftermath, as Red Hollow rebuilt and people slowly emerged from hiding, Evelyn found herself sitting on the porch of the Lucky Strike with Lucy Brennan. "You could have killed him," Lucy said. "In the street. You had the shot." "I know. So why didn't you?" Evelyn was quiet for a long time, thinking about Marcus, about Santa Fe, about all the deaths that haunted her dreams, because killing him wouldn't have solved anything, would have made him a martyr, would have made his men want revenge, would have started a cycle that wouldn't end until everyone was dead. She looked at Lucy. The point wasn't to kill Briggs Calder. The point was to prove he could be beaten, that his power was built on fear, and fear could be overcome. Dead, he's a legend. Alive and defeated, he's just a man who lost. That's what you've been teaching us all along, isn't it? It's not about being the fastest or the strongest. It's about being smart enough to win without becoming the next monster. Something like that. Lucy was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've been thinking about what comes next. Now that Calder's gone, the territory's going to need people who can keep it safe, who can teach other towns what you taught us. You volunteering?" "Maybe, if you'll keep teaching me." Evelyn looked at the girl. Not a girl anymore, really. A young woman who'd learned to control her rage, who'd survived a battle that should have killed her, who understood that real strength wasn't about violence, but about knowing when violence was necessary and when it wasn't. "I'll teach you," Evelyn said. "But not just fighting, everything. Strategy, leadership, how to build communities that can protect themselves, how to turn broken places into something worth defending. Like you did here. Like we did here." This wasn't me, Lucy. This was all of us. Everyone who stood up, everyone who trained, everyone who chose to hope instead of despair. Over the following weeks, Red Hollow transformed. The training sessions behind the livery stable became official. A proper school with a building and a schedule and students coming from towns all across the territory. Lucy became Evelyn's assistant instructor, teaching the basics while Evelyn handled advanced students. Deputy Hart became a regular visitor, bringing news from across the territory and bringing lawmen who wanted training. Daniel Wu returned twice, each time with more students of his own. The network Evelyn had imagined began to take real shape. Towns communicating, sharing resources, watching each other's backs. Catherine Reeves and Michael stayed in Red Hollow. Michael proved to have a gift for teaching, especially working with younger students. His mother opened a second boarding house to accommodate the influx of people coming to learn. Vernon Pike, of all people, became one of Red Hollow's most reliable citizens. He quit drinking, learned carpentry from Thomas Chen, and never once mentioned his past. Sometimes people could change. Not often, but sometimes. The Porter brothers opened a security service, using what Evelyn had taught them to protect traveling merchants. Sarah and Thomas expanded their general store into a proper mercantile. Pete the ranch hand stopped shaking entirely and became an instructor himself, teaching new students that it was never too late to learn control. And Evelyn kept teaching. Not because she'd found redemption, not because she'd forgiven herself for Santa Fe. Those ghosts would never completely leave her. But because she'd learned something important in the years since facing Calder. She'd learned that failure wasn't permanent, that mistakes didn't define you unless you let them, that the past could inform your future without imprisoning it. Marcus had died in Santa Fe, but Daniel Wu had lived. 75 other students had lived. And now hundreds more were learning the same principles, the same discipline, the same understanding that violence should always be the last resort, but could be controlled when necessary. She'd never know if Marcus's death had meaning, never know if her teaching in Santa Fe had been worth the cost. But she knew that what she was building now, this network of trained, disciplined people committed to protecting their communities, that had meaning. That made a difference. 2 years after the battle in the street, Evelyn stood at Marcus's grave. She'd finally returned to Santa Fe, finally faced the place where everything had ended. The cemetery was overgrown, the graves unmarked except for wooden crosses weathered by time. But she knew which one was his. Had paid for a proper headstone, finally. Had carved the words herself. Marcus Wu, teacher, protector, friend. He stood when others fell. It wasn't enough. Could never be enough. But it was what she had. "I'm sorry I ran," she said to the stone, to the memory. "Sorry I let guilt stop me from doing what you would have wanted. But I'm doing it now, teaching again, building something that might last, something that might make this territory a little bit safer." The wind blew across the graveyard. Somewhere, a bird sang. "You were right, Marcus, about discipline mattering, about training making a difference. You were just wrong about timing, wrong about taking on 12 armed men with 3 students at your back." She smiled sadly. "But you were brave, and you saved people, and that counts for something." She left a flower on his grave, a desert bloom, tough and resilient and beautiful, despite the harsh environment. Like the territory itself, like the people she'd trained, like the future she was helping build. On the ride back to Red Hollow, she thought about endings and beginnings, about how the two were often the same thing, about how you could carry your past without being crushed by it, about how failure and success weren't opposites, but rather points on a continuum, each informing the other. She thought about Lucy, who'd transformed from an angry girl into a capable teacher, about Michael, who'd turned his trauma into purpose, about all the broken people she'd worked with who'd become something stronger through discipline and training and hope. The territory would always have men like Briggs Calder, always have violence and injustice and suffering. That was the nature of frontier life, of human life. But it would also have people like Lucy and Michael and Daniel Wu. People trained to stand against that darkness. People who understood that real strength wasn't about domination, but protection. People committed to making their communities safer without becoming the next tyrants. That was the legacy Evelyn was building. Not perfect, not guaranteed to last, but real and tangible and growing. When she rode into Red Hollow that evening, the town looked different than it had 2 years ago. Straighter, somehow. Stronger. The buildings were better maintained. The people walked taller. There was music coming from the Lucky Strike. Someone had finally convinced the piano to work, and laughter drifting on the evening air. Lucy met her at the edge of town. "How was Santa Fe?" the young woman asked. "Hard, necessary, done." Evelyn dismounted, stretched muscles sore from riding. "How were the students?" "Good. Michael's teaching the new group breathing exercises. Carlos has the intermediate students working on environmental awareness. I ran the advanced class through crisis scenarios." Lucy grinned. "We're holding everything together just fine without you. That's the idea. Build something that doesn't need me to survive." "Oh, we still need you, just not to hold our hands anymore." They walked into town together, teacher and student, both forever changed by the year they'd spent fighting and building and learning that sometimes the most dangerous person wasn't the one who could kill the fastest, but the one who chose, when it mattered most, not to. Red Hollow hadn't become paradise. Still had problems. Still had people struggling. Still had the harsh realities of frontier life. But it had hope. Had people trained to protect themselves and each other. Had a network of communities watching each other's backs. Had a future that looked brighter than its past. And at the center of it all, pouring drinks in the Lucky Strike and teaching discipline to anyone willing to learn, was a gray-haired woman who'd spent 7 years running from herself and finally stopped. Not because she'd found peace, not because the guilt had faded, not because the ghosts had stopped haunting her dreams, but because she'd learned that peace wasn't the absence of struggle. It was the decision to keep building despite the struggle, to keep teaching despite the failures, to keep hoping despite every reason to despair. That was Evelyn's final lesson, the one she taught not through words, but through living. That strength wasn't about never falling down. It was about standing back up, about learning from the fall, about using that knowledge to help others avoid the same mistakes. And if, in the process, you built something bigger than yourself, a network, a community, a legacy of people committed to protecting rather than destroying, then maybe, just maybe, your life had meant something. Maybe the deaths in Santa Fe hadn't been for nothing. Maybe Marcus would have been proud. Maybe she could finally forgive herself. Or maybe not. Maybe the guilt would always be there, a weight she carried. But she could carry it while still moving forward, could acknowledge it while still building something better. That was enough. That had to be enough. The sun set over Red Hollow, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. In the Lucky Strike, someone started playing the piano, badly, but enthusiastically. People gathered to listen, to drink, to celebrate another day survived in a harsh territory. And Evelyn Cross, formerly Evelyn Marlowe, formerly a woman running from her past, stood behind her bar and poured drinks and watched her students laugh, and knew that she'd finally found something worth more than peace. She'd found purpose. And in the end, that made all the difference.